Right, guys. So firstly, a good afternoon to you all. I am absolutely delighted that you are joining us today for this Vistage CEO Climb webinar designed exclusively for senior leaders. Quick intro from me. My name's Nici Jupp and I am the founder of Talent Gateway. And I've worked with over 100 leaders to help them scale their businesses with confidence through hiring the right people at the right time. I run a leadership executive search and hiring advisory business focused on scaling businesses. I also have a podcast host for anybody. I am a podcast host for anybody interested in listening to unfiltered conversations with senior leaders who have scaled businesses, exited, taken them through to IPO, and everything in between. So, without further ado, please do put questions in the chat as we go. I may or may not get to them, but we'll certainly have time at the end for Q&A. So I am now going to share my slide deck with you. Righty-ho. So what we're going to cover today. So we're going to kick off by looking at what changes when a business gets to the scaling phase and why getting hiring right at that stage matters. I'm going to introduce to you the 5 Ps, so the 5 foundational pillars that if you embed them into your business, the likelihood of you improving your outcomes from hiring, you will be far more successful. I'm going to bring that to life with a use case towards the end of the session. And I'm going to get you to commit to taking some action, 2 to 3 actions with some timescales. My advice is, if you can, take notes and engage in the chat. It doesn't look like I get to actually see the chat on the session, so we'll do Q&A at the end. There's a quick exercise 2/3 of the way through. It'll take 2 minutes and hopefully you'll get a lot from that. And as I say, there's Q&A at the end. I would like you to start, if I may, by rating yourself with regards to your, I'm going to call it your recruitment prowess. So if you rate yourself 0, then it is something that you struggle with or something that you are very new to. Right through to number 10, where you're absolutely nailing it. And the reason you're here today is you think maybe you could possibly improve. So quickly write down where you would put yourself 0 to 10. And then what I'm going to do is get you to rate yourself again at the end of the session. So let's get started. Let's take a look, firstly, at what I would call a standard growth curve. And we all know that the reality is more like that and that it isn't, as straightforward. But what we do know is that there are different inflection points as a business is growing. In the early days, it's very much a small number of people trying to get an idea off the ground. There's only about 10% of businesses that get through that first inflection point. When you're through that, you then start to need to prove product market fit and also to start to get some traction. Only 2/3 of businesses get through that second inflection point. And you're there or thereabouts 12 to 15 people at that point. But there's been very little by way of hiring. It's all through founders networks, and people that you know, like, and trust. But when you get to that inflection point just before scaling, hiring is a significant factor. 1 in 5 failures are due to hiring mistakes, either hiring too soon, without clarity on role definition, or failing to integrate people into the business. This is why the 5 foundational pillars become really, really important. Because when we reach that inflection point, there are some real key challenges that need to be addressed. The first one is around skills and capabilities. So in the early days, between sort of, first couple of people up to 15, possibly 20 people, people thrive on the scrappiness and they enjoy and thrive at juggling lots of activities and spinning lots of plates. But when we get to that sort of pinch point, what we need is to start hiring some specialists. Marketing could be a good example. In the business, you'll often have somebody who may be an office manager, somebody who's a marketing executive who will take sole responsibility for things like social media, website support, material for events. But actually what you start to need is some leadership in the different functions. It's not just marketing, finance, operations, recruitment. Also, you'll find that people have been promoted into leadership roles because they are exceptional at what they do and not necessarily leading a team. The business requirements in some cases have outgrown the capabilities of the team. That isn't the case in all cases. Some people need the opportunity to step up. Pop in the chat for me if this resonates with you, if you've experienced that, where the skills and capabilities that got you to that point feel like the business is starting to outgrow them and there's a need for something else. The second challenge that we start to see, just see in the chat, just take a mild pause. Yes, I'm getting some sort of definitelys there. The second common problem we see is around process. So up until now, things are done very much on an ad hoc basis. Some key people in the business just know how to get stuff done. And there's very little by way of documented process. So that becomes a challenge when you bring in new people. There's no process for them to follow. So there's a need for consistency so that you can start to measure performance and make efficiencies and improvements. You need people in the business who can develop and build this structure so that then you're able to measure, drive efficiencies, and to scale. So we've had capabilities and skills. We've now looked at processes, because if you sort all your processes out, you can start to manage the business better. Recruitment is very ad hoc at this stage. A lot of shooting from the hip, often leading to mishires. The third set of challenges we see, that's stopped, which isn't helpful, is we start to see decision-making slowing down. I've seen this many, many times. People come to me with their head in their hands, literally their head in their hands, because decision-making is dependent on a small number of people, and they then start to feel the pressure. In some cases, they look and feel burnt out. And ultimately, decision-making is starting to slow down, particularly if those key people are away from the business for a day or two. Nobody knows who to go to get some answers. So you've got a choice at this stage in your business. You can choose to do nothing. And when we think about the growth curve that we were talking about earlier, at best case, you'll flatline if you do nothing. And worst case, you're going to decline. What you actually want is an uptick. So you need to start to think about hiring and how are we going to address these challenges. That's obviously where the 5 Ps come in. No surprise to you here. And we're going to dig into these 5 in a little bit. And we're going to start firstly with plan. So what is planning all about when we look at the 5 Ps to get hiring, hiring success level super high? I am sure I am not alone, and I'm hoping that I can't see any nodding heads, but I'm hoping I'm getting some nodding heads in. I'm not the only one who's experienced the impact of trying to build something with a clear vision. I've got a beautiful picture of the equipment I'm going to build, but often I find that when I get started, there's some important parts missing, whether it's screws, bolts, But the result is I'm disappointed because it isn't quite what I imagined. It's simple. If I had a plan, if I followed it, if I'd have checked that I had all the equipment and all the pieces before I got started, the key here is that you're more likely to achieve the desired results if you have a clear plan. So it's about stacking the odds in your favour. But you might think, well, what has that got to do with hiring? Well, when we think about planning and we're looking at the 5 Ps, planning is at 2 different levels. Firstly, we start at the strategic level. This is to focus on building talent planning into your business planning. I'm absolutely confident that 80+% of you spend a lot of time. You will have regular leadership meetings to ensure that your business is being run successfully in order for you to achieve your plan. But often talent isn't in that plan and those conversations aren't being had. What you need to do is to ask 3 simple questions. If our plan is X in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what do we need in the business, the skills and capability in order to achieve that plan? Second, what do we have already in the business? And thirdly, where are the gaps? This is where you ask 3 key, I call them the 3 Ts, we call them the 3 Ts, 3 key questions. So I know where I want to be, therefore we have discussed the skills and capabilities we're going to need in order to achieve our plan. We know what we've got inside the business and we've identified that we've got some gaps. But the 3 things to ask is it talent that we need, i.e. we need to hire people? Is it training? Are people in the business open to and able to be trained to fill those gaps? Or is it technology? And this is where, unsurprisingly, it wouldn't be a modern day presentation without mentioning the 2 letters AI. This is where you start to question, where does AI fit into our strategy? And therefore, where will it fit into our talent strategy? So just to bring this to life for you, if you are planning an exit, let's say in 3 years, what skills and capabilities do you need in the business to succeed? Getting a good valuation will depend on solid technology, processes, and great financial management, and having all of those in place, much plus more. So I had a client recently who had been through a due diligence process. They didn't sell the business at that point because it became crystal clear that in order for them to achieve the multiplier that they wanted, they needed to improve their technology and infrastructure in the business. So we hired a fractional CTO. And that same client is now leaning heavily on that CTO because they need to consider how to embrace AI into their solution. They're actually an age verification service. So, for example, they'll send agents out to supermarkets. And today, you ask for ID, for example, if somebody's going to buy a product where there's an age restriction. But for them, their business can be hugely impacted by potentially AI all around facial recognition. So they're really leaning into the chief technical officer's skills in order for them to look at the strategy. I talked about planning being at 2 different levels. So that's the strategic level, really, really thinking long and hard about where is the business going and what do we need at a helicopter view. Let's use that term. And when you go down a level, when you've identified, where technology is going to bridge the gap, or whether it's external talent, training is something separate because that's internal. If you're talking about technology being a key part of your strategy, that also will influence the skill sets that you need and whether you're going to need to take on external talent and hire them. But when we go down a level, this is about being able to shape the roles around those gaps. We've identified that it's vital at this stage to have clarity on what's needed in each of the roles to shape a solid job description and person specification. If you don't have that clarity right at the planning stage, you're going to kick off a hiring process only to find that you're not clear, and it will show that that hire will fail. Either you'll go right the way through and you'll hire someone and it will fail, or you'll start the process and waste a lot of time and energy and it will fall apart through the process. This usually involves, and my recommendation, it should always involve when you're shaping a role, several stakeholders' input to ensure that everyone is aligned. You don't want to go all the way through, as I've said, only to end up with a mishire. So a good example in a recent project we worked on was, it was one of my very early clients actually. The CEO had decided that he was going to not completely step away from the business, but stay on the board, but actually step down from the CEO role. And it isn't just relevant in that seniority. It's important that anyone who's going to interact with any particular role, that you do some work with key stakeholders. But using this example, he wanted us to find his replacement, but a key part of that process was to interview non-execs, interview the CEO himself, the board, first reports, and then to play it back to those people involved and say, this is what we've heard, and do you agree that this is what we are looking for before we start this process? Your aim at this point for these roles that you are aligning with your strategy is to build a persona of the kind of candidate that would be successful, both in the role, but of equal, and I would argue more important, your business, because this is contextual to you. A CEO in one business is very different to a CEO in another business. So that is planning. So you've got a plan, you've got clarity in terms of where the business is going, you've got clarity in terms of where your gaps are, and what comes out of that is now clarity and buy-in from stakeholders about the hires you're going to make. And we then get into the second P, which is proposition. Now, at this point, it's about attracting the right candidates, and I can't emphasize that enough. It's not a numbers game. It's about, if you have absolute clarity in terms of the planning, and you then have a really strong, clear job description and person specification, you are far less likely to want to hire the wrong person. But it's as much about having a proposition that's going to attract the right person as it is about repelling those that it isn't attracted to. Here, if your proposition is vague and generic when you are going to be marketing, you'll get lots of applicants potentially, but not necessarily the right ones, which will give you a lot of work. Now, of course, part of your proposition is hard benefits, but it goes beyond that. And when I talk about hard benefits, I mean salary, I mean, are there share options, I mean holidays, I mean flexible working, all the usual things that we think about when we think, well, what's the proposition to a candidate? What can we offer? But it goes beyond that, and I've talked about it briefly. It's contextual to you. So two jobs can have the same job title, but the proposition is completely different. So just to bring this to life for you, talking about the CEO hire, and again, although I'm focusing on these senior level opportunities, it's relevant irrespective of the level in the business. So the CEO hire that I just mentioned, so the strategy was to sell the business in approximately 3 years. So there's an opportunity for somebody who's going to come in. The proposition to this potential new CEO is to build out the tech side of the business. So they'll need some experience of having done something similar. There would be a lot of investor work, so pitching. They needed some experience of doing that. They also had a very ambitious leadership team. A couple of people on that leadership team had applied for the CEO role. So that brings some nuance with it. How able is the individual who potentially comes into this role? How able are they to manage and to keep those individuals engaged who weren't successful in securing the role? So it not only requires the right skill set, but the motivation to want to take on that proposition. And that proposition is very different to another CEO role where you are coming in to lead a steady state business. So we're clear on the plan. We know how it fits in with our business plan. We therefore know what skills and capabilities gaps we have, therefore who we're going to hire. We're clear for each of the roles what the proposition is. We now need to promote it. This is all about getting in the right room with your proposition, a virtual room. If you are standing in a room shouting out a fantastic message, if you're in the wrong room, the right person isn't going to hear it. So if we think about, let me ask you, when you go to change your car, is a really good example. How much research do you do online? Now, all the stats are different, out there. Anyone got a guess in the chat? How much of the sales cycle happens before you go and even step into a showroom, if you go into a showroom at all nowadays? Lots, yeah. It's about 70%. Someone's got it. Andy, 70% of it's done online, and it is the same for hiring. The question is, where are you marketing your proposition and your opportunity? For example, do you have a careers site? Which job boards are you using? Which partner are you using to market your proposition if you're choosing to use either an executive search firm or an agency? Have you got Google recommendations? So I would now like you to take just a couple of minutes to do a quick exercise for me. So I am going to put my timer on for 2 minutes. I'll let you know when I'm putting it on. What I'd like you to do is, in the same way when you are looking to purchase something like a car, put yourself in the shoes of a candidate. And I'd like you to imagine that you've seen an opportunity at your business. And I'd like you to quickly do some research to find out what would a candidate find out about your business that would shape whether they do or don't decide to apply for a role. So I'm going to stick the timer on for 2 minutes. And just to be clear, what I'm looking for is for you to spend 2 minutes, put yourself in the shoes of a candidate, and look virtually. What can you find out about the company that you currently work for on here using either your phone or the desktop? And what impression would you get about your company? What would it say on the careers site? Would you look like interesting? First 3 pages of Google tell what we're about, some stuff on leadership development and then apprenticeships. So Mark, is that good, bad, somewhere in between? Have you learned something, that a candidate, would learn about your business? Think it's all good. And that's great. This is really about your online footprint as a business. This is where people are going to make a judgment in terms of whether there's somebody they want to invest some time in terms of the hiring process. So we've done the first 3 Ps. We've done plan, we've done what the proposition is, and we now done the exercise. We start to think about, so what's the process? A hiring process starts very much as soon as you've decided that you're going to run a recruitment process. We focus on 3 Cs when we think about a hiring process. First is clarity. What is the end-to-end process and who is going to be involved and what role are they going to play in the end-to-end hiring process? Then it comes to being consistent. So the process needs to be consistent for each candidate throughout the process. And this is important because it ensures that nothing creeps in like unconscious bias, and that each candidate is going to be treated the same, and that the criteria that you put in place in order to draw key factors in throughout the recruitment process and the interview process are consistent. So you're measuring them against each other. And then finally, communication with both your colleagues who are going to be in the recruitment process, and clarity about what role they're going to play. And really important, candidates, regularly communicating with them. Nothing is worse than having a candidate that goes into a weekend not knowing. And it doesn't have to be even that a decision has been made. It's just an update that people need. So, but why does that matter, Nici? You might be thinking, well, we don't always do the 3 Cs, or we call it something else, and we're not always consistent. But it matters because it can put people off. If they've had a poor experience, they may choose not to have dealings with your business. They might talk about the experience to others. So we recently worked with a social housing provider, and they had rapidly expanded their business. They'd got to about 120 people, very, very quickly. And when they came to us, they had what I would describe as a revolving door. So some people were starting with the business and leaving very quickly. Others were dropping out as part of the hiring process halfway through, and some weren't accepting offers when they were being offered a role. And so, the MD, when he came to me, was sort of throwing his arms up in the air. And when we looked at the 5 pillars across the business, there was very little planning going on, simply because, they were spinning lots of plates, they were growing rapidly. They had a fantastic proposition, but it wasn't being communicated well. And their process was very, very random. In some cases, decisions were being made based on whether someone liked the individual that they were interviewing. And in some cases, interviews were taking no longer than 15 minutes. Many managers had been promoted and didn't really have any interview training at all. So they didn't really know what they were doing. And it was random who was leading the interview. So it's not surprising in that chaos that they would constantly have a list of 15 to 20 hires, not all new. And the energy, effort and money that was being wasted in that process, well, you can only imagine. So we sorted out the process by, I can't recommend highly enough having an applicant tracking system as you start to do a number of hires. It adds not only consistency, but it enables you to communicate clearly throughout the process with other people that might be interviewing at a second stage, or if you have a third stage in an interview, so that people know what's being asked before, so that the poor candidate isn't being asked the same questions. Now, of course, in some cases, you do need to get someone else's view of a particular thing that you're looking for, but an applicant tracking system system can be a game changer when you're hiring. And finally, let's move on to perform. So you've done all the hard work. You've had a candidate accept your offer, and hurrah, everyone celebrates. But it's really important that you engage them and get them onboarded efficiently, effectively, so that they feel part of your team, and that firstly, that there isn't a big gap between them accepting and feeling part of the team. So start before. So perform is about getting them to perform in your business, just to be clear. You start before they start with you on day one. So some quick wins, and there could be very, very simple things like what we would call gathering fun facts to share with team members before the individual starts with the business. So working with very, very different clients, what we've done previously is you reach out to the candidate and you say, you share with the existing team, hi, John is going to be joining us as the new general manager. Here's a little bit about John. So obviously something about his work background, but here's also some fun facts about John. John's favourite sport, John's favourite book, John's favourite film, chocolate bar. You might even choose to have the chocolate bar on the desk. It doesn't have to be expensive on the day that they start, so that the team knows something about John before he lands on the first day. And also, this obviously has to align with your culture, but they feel like people know a little bit about them when they start. The second part of getting them to perform is to focus on what good looks like. So provide them with everything that they need to succeed so that they're meeting the right people, they're provided with the right technology, training and development, but they've got clear expectations from you in terms of how they're going to be measured so that they'll know when they're doing a great job. So a recent client we worked with focused heavily, their onboarding process focused heavily in the first week. Day one was all about form filling, taking an office tour. And the first week, was about getting to know the team. But then the individual was pretty much left to get on with it until their first review, which was often 3 months because the people in the business were so busy. What you don't want is to invest all that time and energy in hiring someone who is right for your culture, right for the role, only to find that it fails at this final hurdle, and it really doesn't need to, so the final point underperform is to embed those check-ins. So let me get on to my final. We're at the nearing the end now, folks. So I just wanted to bring to life 2 of the 5 Ps rather than go through them all with one particular case study. So this was a medical services business in the healthcare space, and they had grown to a team of 30. The backstory was in the very early stages of growth, the founder in this particular case was a clinician himself, and he'd got the business off the ground, spotted an opportunity and built an exceptional cohort of consultants to support the business. But he recognised, the entrepreneur, that he couldn't be a full-time clinician and build and grow the internal capability of the business. So he made his first hire. She then came on board and she grew the business. He focused on the clinical side. She focused on the business side. And she took them through the next phase of growth. She hired everyone to get them to this team of 30. She signed everything off. She did payroll. She signed off invoices. She won contracts, managed relationships. She was the glue that held the business together. And whilst that was fantastic, it also created a problem. She got to burn out and ultimately decided that she needed a new challenge and that she was going to leave the business. And this was at a point where they were really at that coming full circle to the beginning of the presentation, at that inflection point where the business had an opportunity to scale. But she was burnt out. So coming back to plan. So we thought, okay, let's not panic. Let's go back to basics. What's the plan for the business, strategic level? The plan is we want to exit in 4 years and we want to go from 6 million to a 20 million turnover. Okay, so what do we need in the business by way of skills and capability in order for us to get to that target in 4 years? And what do we already have? And where are the gaps? So a key part to the exercise here was to really understand the gap that she was going to leave inside the business. And to do that, we needed to engage key stakeholders. It was quite interesting. The initial dialogue with the CEO was, I can just hire a new ops manager and I can take on everything else myself. Now, we knew the reality was that that couldn't happen. So what we did is we got the operations director herself to write her own job description and person spec. And we took a look at that. And what became really, really clear is the fact that she did so much without even thinking about it. So we then sat with her team to find out, well, what is it that she does? And so then we had a really clear picture of where we are today. We asked the question, are there people who are in the team that we can delegate some of this responsibility and activity to? And of course, that there were. But ultimately, where are the gaps going to be in the business that need to be filled in order for us to achieve that plan? Just let me go back a stage. And only by doing that exercise, by really unpacking what needed to be in the business, and of course, we asked the technology question to build that into who we were going to hire. Could we then unpack and be realistic about what the job description and person spec would look like in order for us to hire for this individual's replacement? Now, it wouldn't surprise any of you on here, I am sure, to find that actually it wasn't one role that we needed to hire for in order to take the business from where it was to where it wanted to be in 4 years. And we ultimately went on to hire a chief commercial officer and a chief operating officer. And that company is absolutely flying now. So I just wanted to bring it to life with that short case study, but I'm aware that I focused just on the first 2 Ps. But I'm drawing the presentation to a close now, and I wanted you to take a view in terms of where do you think, I'm just going to look at timing, take a view in terms of where you think you are on our rating of 0 to 10, given what you've heard. Now, I know a lot of this has been focused more in the beginning of the process, so that planning and the proposition, but we've certainly touched on promote and the importance of being in the right room, so on the right platforms, and getting that proposition communicated to your persona. And then we've talked about the importance of getting the person onboarded and putting, key measurements in place. So rate yourself again, 0 to 10, and pop it in the chat. Pop in the chat. So someone thinks Mark's doing well. Could do more onboarding. Thanks for sharing that, Mark. What are you versus where you thought you were to begin with. So for example, you know, were you 5 before and you're 6 now, or 5 before, 2 now? So, you know, pop it in the chat so I get a, you know, an idea of where you are. Great, Andy. Must be good to hear. This has helped me improve maybe a couple of points. Fantastic, David. Good to hear. So you know, thank you for engaging with me on chat. One thing I would like people in the, you know, the virtual room to do, because these sessions are only good, you know, if you take action. And, you know, we all get swept away with the realities of our day jobs, you know, once we switch off from the session. It'd be really good, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. And I know as a Vistage member myself, when I get the most from the sessions is when I commit to doing something and I give myself a timeline. So, you know, I would highly recommend, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, that you write down an action, 2 or 3 that you're going to take that will enable you to improve, you know, your hiring capabilities and ultimately embed these 5 pillars into your business. And when are you going to do that by? You know, you may or may not feel comfortable posting that in the chat. And indeed, if anybody wants to, you know, follow up with me after, share your actions, and I'm more than happy to hold you account to those actions and commitments. So just take a couple of minutes to do that. I'm going to stop sharing, and then hopefully you will just see me. And then I will open the floor to a Q&A, and I've done okay on time. So has anyone got any questions for me? You know, make it sort of, you know, I want to make this as relevant as possible for, you know, for your businesses. Otherwise, you know, it's not valuable, you know, and I don't like sitting here and, you know, preaching. Thanks, Andy. You know, it's important to me that, you know, Vistage and I can offer as much value, because ultimately, you know, I want your businesses to be successful, and getting the right people in place, you know, can make or break it. Thanks, Mark. I'll wait a couple of minutes and see if anybody has got any questions. But the fantastic Vistage team are recording the session, and I'm sure you can get access to it after this. And you know, they have my contact details, so do feel free, you know, if you're not comfortable to share things in a more public forum, to reach out to me, you know, as I say, via the Vistage team. So I will keep the session open. How are you finding the markets at the moment, Abridge? Markets at the moment, interesting. I mean, the space that we work in, where a lot of the businesses, not all, about 60% of the businesses we work with would traditionally go for institutional finance investment, usually VC, at that sort of scale up inflection. And there isn't as much money sloshing around. I think there's still uncertainty in the market. But that said, there are businesses still hiring. They're thinking a lot around technology and how that might affect their business. But in order for the business to grow, you know, there are still, you know, positive. Yeah, I'd say that the market is probably a 7 out of 10 in terms of, you know, hiring activity at the moment. But certainly in that VC space, it's slower. Hopefully that answers your question, Abridge. My pleasure. Right, I will sit here. Please feel free to, you know, leave. But I will sit open here for, a couple of minutes more. I do hope the session was valuable. It's sometimes difficult to position it because obviously I don't get to see who is in the audience in terms of size of your business. But, I've been doing this for some time, and thanks, Justin. And sometimes there's lots of questions that come after. So as I say, please feel free to reach out if that could be valuable to you. But in the meantime, I will let you go off and have your teas, coffees and lunches. And thank you for attending the Vistage session, everyone.